Hello there, lovely people, it's Alex from Nintendo Life here, and today we're going to be talking all about that Star Fox rumor, Star Fox Grand Prix, that's supposedly being made by Retro Studios, because lots of people seem to think it's true. We're going to be looking at both sides of the argument, saying it's true, saying it's not true, and I have to say I'm leaning more towards the latter. I think it's a total load of hoopla, to be honest, because, well, I'll talk about it later, but I'm perfectly willing to also look at the other side of the argument and say maybe it is true, because at the end of the day, we really don't know. And it's actually a lot more interesting to talk about it as if it is true. But anyway, enough waffling, let's dive right into things. To start off, I'm going to really quickly summarize the whole thing. Basically, there was a leak, supposedly a rumor going around, that there is a new game called Star Fox Grand Prix, which is an action-adventure racing game coming to the Nintendo Switch, which is obviously in the Star Fox franchise, and it's being developed by Retro Studios, who have made things like Metroid Prime and Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, which are both marvelous games. There was a very brief follow-up to this with somebody showing a picture, just a piece of paper, like literally just a photograph of a piece of paper with Star Fox Grand Prix written on it in like a logo style, if you like, as well as an alternative logo underneath as well, just, sort of like dark and light themes depending on what background you're putting it on, which is fine. There was some notes around it, nothing really of any significance. There was a little bit of Japanese as well, and that's pretty much all the evidence we have. What gives this rumor a little bit of extra weight, though, is the fact that numerous outlets have turned around and said, yep, we've heard similar rumors from different people, within the industry, and, all the things are matching up. It's Retro making it, it's Star Fox, it's an action-adventure racing game, all that stuff, so it's it does have weight to it. It's not just something that somebody's thrown out there. There's even an ending that sort of references this kind of thing at the end of Star Fox Command, which is a very average DS game. It had branching paths, and you could choose to play as different characters, and you got different endings depending on what you did. It's fairly standard stuff. And one of the endings that you could get resulted in Crystal leaving Star Fox the team, and therefore Fox McCloud, leaving Fox very depressed, and then Falco says, hey, why don't we become racing drivers for some reason? So they modify their R-Wings to be like G0. They actually call it G0, yeah. So they enter this G0 Grand Prix, and they're both brilliant, and everything's fine again, and obviously it's a reference to F-Zero, and a number of people have said, well, James McCloud is a character in F-Zero, maybe it's a direct reference there, and that they actually take place in the same universe, which is entirely possible. And it does give credence to this idea that there's going to be a Star Fox racing game, but I think it sort of hints more towards something else. If this is true, I entirely believe that Retro Studios were in fact making an F-Zero game, and Nintendo turned around and said, you know what's popular? Well, at least more popular than F-Zero, Star Fox. Retro could easily have approached Nintendo and said, hey, we've got this idea for an F-Zero game, look at it, isn't it brilliant, we're Retro, we're good at making games, give us some money, and Nintendo were like, yeah, that's a pretty good idea, get working on that, but by the way, Star Fox is kind of a thing that we do as well. Do that. Wouldn't even be the first time Nintendo have done this, even with Star Fox. Back in the day, Rare were producing a game called Dinosaur Planet for the N64, and Nintendo looked at that and saw the main character and said, you know what, that looks an awful lot like Fox McCloud. Would you like to make it a Star Fox game? And Rare maybe turned around and said, that's a strange idea, but they did it anyway, and Star Fox Adventures was born. It was originally going to be an entirely different game, which is extremely obvious if you've played the game. This is, of course, all speculation. We've got very little to go on with the rumor, and I'm not even the first person to come up with the whole Star Fox Command racing ending G0 thing. It's been bumming around on Twitter since the announcement pretty much came out, but even so, it's worth mentioning. Now, obviously, Star Fox as a genre is nothing to do with racing. Maybe there was some sort of racing minigame at one point. I haven't played every single Star Fox game. Well, basically, I just haven't played Star Fox Assault. But Star Fox as a game, the actual genre, the style of game, sort of the flying around shooting thing, basically Star Wars, is kind of old and hasn't really had anything to revitalize it properly, except, they tried it with Star Fox Zero and it didn't really work. They tried to do some different things with like the gyrocopter and stuff, but it just didn't really pan out and people didn't really gel with it. So an entirely new genre could give Star Fox a new lease of life. and finally get it out of the rut that it's been in for ages. And that leads me to another argument, an argument against this being true, is why would they make another Star Fox game when Star Fox games recently haven't been doing all that well, to say the least. People have also rightly been saying, why would they make this a Star Fox game and not make it an F-Zero game when it's so obviously F-Zero in the whole sort of idea, you know, an action racing game that's set in the future? Why is it not just an F-Zero game? Well, I think it comes down to the fact that even though Star Fox as a franchise and as a name and as a brand hasn't been doing all that well, F-Zero has basically died. F-Zero has seen bits of success and it has been a historically very good franchise, but at the end of the day, they haven't produced a game in so long. Why would anyone care? People don't recognize F-Zero, and I know loads of people are rushing to the comments saying, I know F-Zero, I'd recognize it, and yeah, obviously you do, because, you know, if you recognize F-Zero, you're probably a long-time Nintendo fan, but not everyone is. Nintendo are trying to appeal to a broader audience at the same time, and Star Fox is more recognizable than F-Zero. Just. And even if somebody doesn't recognize Star Fox as a brand, what are they going to be more intrigued by? Just some sort of, you know, some fast-looking cars that aren't really cars, that just drive really quickly and don't have wheels and stuff like that, and maybe Captain Falcon on the box, Captain Falcon. Or are they going to be more interested in the anthropomorphized animals they see on the box, you know, oh look, that's got a fox that's standing like a person, and thus a new generation of furries is born. Even though it hasn't done that well, I do think Star Fox as a brand just has more appeal to non-people who know lots about Nintendo do. It could even be that Retro were making this game and it was an F-Zero game, and they presented it an F-Zero game and Nintendo went, yeah, let's bring F-Zero back. And then Star Fox Zero, god, there's a lot of zeros in this video. Star Fox Zero didn't do as well as they'd like, and they had more ideas for Star Fox games, and they thought, oh god, well, we've got all these assets and stuff. Why don't you put those in your F-Zero game and, you know, we can give Star Fox a bit of a reboot. It's more recognizable and it's more appealing. Could be complete nonsense, of course, but it's fun to imagine. So what about the idea of the actual game itself? The idea of an action-adventure racing game, which some people have said is similar to Diddy Kong Racing, which is a brilliant game. There haven't really been that many action-adventure racing games. The only ones that I can think of in recent memory are arguably things like Forza Horizon, and I mean, that really is pushing what an action-adventure racing game is. But people really like Forza Horizon. They like the idea of being able to drive around and, you know, interact with the world, this big open world, and then go into races and stuff like that. It's more appealing than just a load of menus and then you go into races. I know plenty of people that really love Forza Horizon, but don't like the mainline Forza games because it's just not as appealing. It's not as interactive. It's not as relatable and not as human. The idea of being able to drive around as one of your favorite Star Fox characters is great as well, and there's loads to choose from. Not all of them are good. I'm looking at you, Panther. You could even have little missions that are closer to the original Star Fox style, where you're flying around and, you know, just sort of really short bursts of gameplay like that. I think that would work, and that would be a better way to include the Star Fox gameplay, rather than have it, you know, start to finish these really long levels. I don't know though, because I'm not a games developer, and I haven't played this game that I've just made up in my head. The idea on paper does sound like fun, I'm not entirely sure it sounds typically Nintendo. Having said that, back in the day, the idea of a first-person shooter Metroid game in a 3D environment sounded completely insane, and yet Metroid Prime was one of the finest Metroid games to date. I trust Retro, to be honest. So if this is true, I've no doubt that it's going to be good fun, and they've been working on it for long enough to actually make it work. So it would be really exciting if it was true. Still not entirely convinced I think it is true, but if it was, I certainly don't think it would be a bad thing. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, then why don't you extrapolate about that subscribe button from just a few lines of text, and be sure to check out NintendoLife.com for all sorts of lovely Nintendo-related content. Thank you again for watching. Bye-bye. I do say I had thought of it independently, but I could just have as easily have driving around as your favorite character from the Star Fox and